it is an irony, and I can't quite figure it out really if it's even a fair, if it's a fair representation at times that the Reformed are not inclined towards evangelism. I mean, the caricature exists because there obviously are people that have earned the nickname Frozen Chosen and things like that. But some
Right.
of the very best evangelists in history were Reformed Calvinistic types,
Absolutely.
beginning with Calvin himself in the
Right.
history of the Reformation. The ministerial registry in Geneva, Calvin's training center was a training center, much like, I mean, his was the real deal. What we're doing is a little miniature, but, a training center for pastors and missionaries in a time where not only was the gospel being spread far away, it was being spread locally and often at the cost of one's life. So the history of the Reformation is really the history of carrying out the Great Commission, bearing Christ's cross to the ends of the earth. And then some of the great, missionaries in history, even since Calvin, have been reformed as well, both on and off this continent. So somehow, somewhere along the lines, it's kind of like in the Lord of the Rings, history became legend, legend became myth. Reformed folks were great
Hmm.
evangelists. They got a little bit less interested, and then now we wonder, where it happens, at least in certain pockets, and
Right.
that's not so easy to explain. You have different dynamics, like the immigrant narratives of
Hmm.
certain Reformed cultures that immigrated from parts of Europe to North America, and they didn't come here as missionaries. They came here escaping war, poverty, famine, and they were in survival mode, not like missionary mode, in that nuanced sense. And that may explain too overdeveloped ministries of inreach at the expense of outreach in a slowly developing narrative. I think there are different ways to explain it depending on the context. I also think it's important to be careful and charitable, because not every perception is accurate when it comes to
Absolutely.
this. In other words, there are certain communions, let's say, that may be more evangelistically inclined than others, but I don't think you could even say simply of one denomination, for instance, that it's really evangelistic or really not, because you would have exceptions within each of those churches that would challenge any sort of a generalization.
Sure.
What I think it's helpful to say is that local churches today, wherever they're at, and I mean geographically, but also just in terms of interest in the subject, are challenged not only with the need to do evangelism, outreach, they're challenged by the reality of trying to keep their covenant kids. We live in an age where social media has taken the place of the Sunday school teacher, is more influential than the catechism teacher on Wednesday night, has the ear of a young person more than most local pastors and perhaps even parents do. And that's important to think about. Like, who has the ear of our young people? Who has the ear of the rising generation? And one of the things, like it or not, that the current context of all things social justice has affected is a real sensitivity to what this question, what is the mission of the church? What does it look like if you're a Christian, to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves? What does it look like to do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God? So I mean, I think like a decade ago, you could almost phrase the question in a pretty sterile way about outreach, and it was sort of detached from this concern about our covenant kids. Today, I think covenant kids need to see the church doing outreach. They need to see the church carrying out aspects of the Great Commission, showing compassion to neighbors in ways that silence the accusations of apathy and indifference that are often leveled against the church, at least in the current context. So, this is what I mean by saying there are certain challenges that are in front of the church right now. It's not simply the question of when will we win our neighbors, it's will we keep our kids?